Today, we're looking at three stories that might seem disconnected at first glance, but trust me, they paint a remarkable picture when you put them together. First, the Trump administration wants something from every tourist coming to America, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Second, an unexpected conversation is happening between Argentina and Britain about weapons, decades after they fought a brutal war over some windswept islands in the South Atlantic. And third, Britain is quietly walking back one of its Brexit decisions, negotiating with Brussels about student exchanges. The most fascinating part? I've saved it for the very end of this episode. I spent years inside one of the biggest media organizations you've ever heard of. I watched editors bury inconvenient facts, twist narratives to protect the powerful, shape stories to fit agendas. Eventually, I couldn't stomach it anymore, so I walked away. Now I operate independently, answer to nobody but you, and I tell you what's actually happening in the world. No corporate filter, no editorial board telling me what I can and cannot say. If you value independent journalism that refuses to play by the establishment's rules, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. And listen, we pour enormous energy into fact-checking every claim, verifying every source, making sure we're not spreading misinformation in an era where fake news floods every corner of the internet. If you can support this work financially, even a small monthly sponsorship makes a real difference. It keeps us independent, keeps us honest, keeps us going. And please watch until the end, because that's where the most intriguing revelation is waiting. Let's start with what's happening at American borders. The Trump administration is preparing a new requirement for everyone entering the United States as a tourist. Every single visitor, regardless of where they're from, would need to hand over their social media information from the past 5 years. Think about that for a moment. 5 years of your Facebook posts, your Twitter threads, your Instagram stories, your TikTok videos, everything you've shared, every opinion you've expressed, every group you've joined, every friend you've added, all of it becomes material for American immigration officials to review before they let you through the door. British media outlets are reporting significant alarm in the tourism industry about this proposal. And you can understand why they're worried, can't you? Because next summer, the United States is co-hosting the World Cup with Mexico and Canada. This is one of the biggest sporting events on the planet, drawing millions of fans from every continent. Imagine the bottleneck. Imagine the delays. Imagine the intrusions into privacy for every football supporter trying to attend matches in American stadiums. You're excited to watch your national team play. You've bought your tickets months in advance. You've booked your hotels. And now you're told to compile 5 years of social media activity before you can board your flight. But here's what most people miss when they see headlines about visa requirements and social media checks. This isn't really about tourism. This is about normalization. This is about establishing a precedent that governments can demand comprehensive digital histories from anyone who wants to cross their borders. Today, it's tourists visiting for the World Cup. Tomorrow, it's business travelers attending conferences. Next year, it's students enrolling in universities. And before you know it, surrendering your entire online life to border authorities becomes standard procedure everywhere, not just in America. Think about the implications for a moment. Your political opinions, your religious views, your criticisms of foreign governments, your jokes that might be misinterpreted, your associations with organizations that some bureaucrat might flag as suspicious. All of it potentially grounds for denial of entry, all of it permanently recorded in some database, all of it used to build a profile of who you are and what you believe. You might think you have nothing to hide, but that's not really the point, is it? The point is whether you trust governments to fairly and accurately judge 5 years of your digital life, to understand context and nuance, to respect your right to hold opinions they don't like. And here's where things get even more intriguing. This requirement comes at exactly the moment when the United States is expecting unprecedented numbers of international visitors. The World Cup is going to be enormous. The economic benefits are supposed to be massive. But if tourists are deterred by invasive screening procedures, if families decide it's too much hassle to compile years of social media records, if business travelers choose alternative destinations, then who benefits? Certainly not the American tourism industry, which is already expressing serious concerns about the policy. So watch this space carefully. Watch whether other countries follow America's lead. Watch whether the European Union, Canada, Australia, Britain implement similar requirements for people entering their borders. Because once one major country establishes this precedent, others will feel pressure to match it, to appear equally serious about security, equally rigorous in their vetting. And suddenly, international travel requires surrendering digital privacy at every border you cross. That's the pattern emerging here, and it's worth paying very close attention to where it leads. Now let's shift to a completely different part of the world, to a story that might sound like ancient history, but actually reveals something fascinating about how quickly geopolitical relationships can transform. Argentina and Britain fought a war in 1982 over the Falkland Islands, known in Argentina as the Malvinas. It was a brief but brutal conflict. Ships were sunk, aircraft were shot down, hundreds of young men on both sides lost their lives over some remote islands in the South Atlantic that most people couldn't find on a map. Britain won. Argentina's military dictatorship collapsed shortly afterward. And for decades, relations between London and Buenos Aires remained chilly, defined by that war, by competing claims over those islands, by restrictions and limitations born from that conflict. One of those restrictions involved weapons exports. After the Falklands War, Britain imposed strict controls on selling military equipment to Argentina. It made sense at the time, didn't it? You don't arm a country you just fought. You don't sell weapons systems to a government that might use them against you or your allies. Those restrictions remained in place for more than 40 years, outlasting Argentina's dictatorship, outlasting multiple governments in both countries, becoming just part of the landscape of bilateral relations. But now, something's changing. Argentina's current president, Javier Milei, has given an interview to the Daily Telegraph, one of Britain's most prominent newspapers. In that interview, he revealed that Argentina is discussing with Britain the possibility of easing those weapons export restrictions. He talked about his intention to visit Britain in 2026. He extended an invitation to Prime Minister Keir Starmer to visit Buenos Aires. This is a remarkable shift in tone, a remarkable warming of relations between two countries whose last significant interaction involved naval battles and airstrikes. However, and this is crucial, a representative of the British government has since denied Milei's claims. They've stated that negotiations about easing weapons export rules are not actually happening. So we have the Argentine president saying one thing and the British government saying something quite different. Someone's version of events doesn't match reality. Either Milei is exaggerating the state of discussions, trying to project an image of closer ties than actually exist, or the British government is downplaying conversations they'd prefer to keep quiet for now. What's driving this potential shift? Why would Britain even consider relaxing weapons export restrictions to Argentina after decades of maintaining them? Part of the answer lies in Argentina's dramatic political transformation. Javier Milei is not your typical South American leader. He's a libertarian economist, a fierce advocate of free markets, a vocal opponent of socialism in all its forms. He's aligned himself ideologically with the political right in the United States and Europe. He's positioned Argentina as a potential ally to Western interests in a region where China has been making significant economic inroads. For Britain, for the United States, for Western governments concerned about Chinese influence in Latin America, Milei represents an opportunity. But there's another dimension to this story, one that connects to broader geopolitical realignments happening right now. Britain is no longer part of the European Union. It's searching for new trade partnerships, new strategic relationships, new ways to project influence globally without the collective weight of EU membership behind it. Argentina under Milei is pivoting away from traditional South American solidarity and toward closer alignment with the Anglosphere. There's a natural fit emerging here, a convergence of interests that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Yet the British government's denial of negotiations raises questions. Are they genuinely not discussing weapons exports, or are they simply not ready to announce it publicly? Are there divisions within the government about whether to ease restrictions? Is this a case of the Foreign Office moving slowly while Milei moves quickly, leading to mixed messages? Or is Milei simply getting ahead of himself, announcing progress that hasn't actually materialized? Watch this carefully, because the broader pattern matters more than the specific details of weapons sales. What we're seeing is the potential rehabilitation of Argentina in Western geopolitical calculations, driven by its president's ideological alignment and his willingness to break with regional neighbors. If Britain does eventually ease restrictions, it won't be an isolated decision. It'll signal a strategic judgment that Argentina under Milei is now an ally worth cultivating, even if that means setting aside decades of post-Falklands caution. That's a significant geopolitical shift, and the fact that it's even being discussed reveals how rapidly old certainties can crumble when political winds change direction. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Are you finding value in this analysis? Are you learning things that mainstream media isn't telling you? Then help this channel grow. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who needs to hear independent perspectives. We're building something different here, something that doesn't rely on corporate funding or establishment approval, and your engagement makes that possible. Now let's turn to our third story, and this one's particularly interesting if you've been following Britain's complicated relationship with the European Union since Brexit. Remember Brexit? The dramatic referendum in 2016, the years of bitter negotiations, the promises of sovereignty and independence, the warnings of isolation and economic damage. One of the casualties of Brexit was Britain's participation in Erasmus, the EU's student exchange program that allowed young people to study in universities across Europe, to learn languages, to build connections, to experience different cultures. When Britain left the EU, it also left Erasmus. The government said this was necessary, that they were replacing it with something better, something more globally focused. They launched the Turing scheme, named after Alan Turing, the brilliant mathematician and codebreaker. The Turing program would send British students all over the world, not just to Europe. It would be broader, more ambitious, more aligned with Britain's new global outlook. But here's the thing about student exchanges. They work best when they're reciprocal. European students came to British universities. British students went to European universities. It was an exchange, a two-way flow that benefited everyone. The Turing scheme sends British students abroad, but it doesn't bring foreign students to Britain in the same systematic way. It's not quite the same thing. Now, according to the newspaper Britain is preparing to sign an agreement with the European Union to resume participation in a student exchange program starting in January 2027. Negotiations are supposed to happen next week. This would mark a significant reversal, a quiet admission that leaving Erasmus maybe wasn't such a brilliant idea after all. Think about what this represents. Brexit was supposed to be about taking back control, about rejecting European bureaucracy, about charting an independent course. But one by one, Britain keeps finding itself negotiating its way back into European programs and frameworks, because the alternatives aren't working as well as promised. First, it was security cooperation, then it was research programs, then it was regulatory alignment in various sectors, and now it's student exchanges. Each reversal is presented as pragmatic, sensible, a natural evolution of the relationship. But collectively, they paint a picture of a country gradually recognizing that some forms of integration made practical sense, regardless of the political symbolism. The timing matters too. These negotiations are happening under a Labour government led by Keir Starmer, a government that didn't lead the Brexit campaign, that has been looking for ways to improve relations with Brussels without actually trying to rejoin the EU. Student exchanges are politically safe. Nobody except the most hardcore Brexit supporters thinks young people shouldn't be able to study abroad. It's a low controversy area where Britain can demonstrate willingness to cooperate with Europe without triggering accusations of betraying Brexit. But if you're paying attention, if you're watching the pattern, you can see where this might lead. Today it's student exchanges. Tomorrow it might be closer alignment on trade standards, on regulatory frameworks, on environmental policies. Each individual step is small, each one has a reasonable justification, but the cumulative effect is Britain gradually moving back toward closer integration with Europe, not through dramatic gestures, but through incremental pragmatism. And here's what I find most interesting about this development. It's happening quietly. There's no grand announcement, no major speech, no political fanfare. It's being negotiated behind the scenes, reported in specialist publications, presented as a technical matter rather than a strategic shift. That's how these things usually happen, isn't it? Not with dramatic reversals and public apologies, but with quiet adjustments, with pragmatic accommodations, with incremental steps that don't trigger political backlash, but collectively transform the landscape. So what connects these three stories? What's the thread running through American visa requirements, Argentine-British weapons talks, and European student exchanges? It's about how quickly certainties can shift. 5 years ago, nobody imagined tourists would need to hand over comprehensive social media histories to cross borders. 40 years after the Falklands War, nobody expected Argentina and Britain to be discussing weapons sales, and many Brexit supporters assumed leaving European programs was permanent, irreversible, a clean break never to be reconsidered. But here we are. Borders are becoming more surveilled and less welcoming, even as countries need tourism revenue. Old enemies are exploring new partnerships, driven by ideological alignment and strategic calculations. And Brexit's hard edges are being gradually softened, one program at a time, as practical reality asserts itself over political symbolism. The world keeps changing, faster than we expect, in directions we don't always anticipate. The most interesting revelation, the thing I've been saving until now, it's that these aren't separate stories at all. They're all examples of the same phenomenon, the same pattern playing out in different contexts. Governments everywhere are responding to perceived security threats by expanding surveillance and restricting movement. Countries are reassessing old alliances and old enmities based on current ideological alignments rather than historical grievances. And political projects that seemed permanent, like Brexit's complete separation from Europe, are being gradually modified by practical necessity. None of this is inevitable. None of it is predetermined. But it's all happening right now, shaping the world we're going to live in tomorrow. The question is whether we're paying enough attention to see the pattern, to understand where these trends might lead, to ask whether this is the direction we actually want to go. So remember the key points here. America is normalizing comprehensive digital surveillance at borders under the guise of visa requirements. Argentina and Britain might be warming relations significantly, though someone's not being entirely honest about how far discussions have progressed. And Britain is quietly walking back one of Brexit's most visible breaks with Europe, rejoining student exchanges after creating a replacement program that didn't quite work as promised. 3 stories, 1 pattern, all pointing toward a world that's simultaneously more surveilled, more strategically fluid, and more pragmatically integrated than the political rhetoric suggests. If this analysis has been valuable, if you've learned something you won't hear anywhere else, do me a favor. Hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, and if you're able, consider supporting this work with a monthly sponsorship. Independent journalism requires independent funding. We don't have corporate backers. We don't answer to advertisers. We don't filter our coverage to please powerful interests. We rely on you, on viewers who value honesty and depth over clickbait and propaganda. Your support keeps us going, keeps us free, keeps us focused on the truth rather than the narrative. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.